Hi, I'm Jenny Rushmore of Cashmerette, and today I'm going to take you through how to trace sewing patterns. So I'm going to be showing you how to trace the sewing patterns in my book, Sewing the Curve. The paper patterns are actually available in the back of the book, but you need to trace them for two reasons. One is because the patterns are printed on both sides of the paper, so you can't just cut them out. But also there's some overlapping of the pattern pieces, and so you need to trace them in order to use all of them. Now that said, there are many times you need to trace patterns, so even if you're not using Sewing the Curve patterns, this might be something you need to learn to do. To get ready for tracing, the first thing you need to do is have tracing paper. So there are various different kinds of tracing paper you can get. Specifically for sewing people, there is what's called Swedish tracing paper, which is really popular, which is a sort of semi-translucent paper that has a slightly fabric-y feel, and sometimes you can even get ones that have grids on them or dots, which will help you with alterations later. So I really like using that type. You can also use medical paper that they cover beds in when you go to the doctors, which is kind of a funny one, but it's a source that you can find that is reasonably cheap and you can buy lots and lots of it. The one piece of advice I would have is that you really want to have wide tracing paper if possible, because sometimes regular tracing paper comes in very narrow widths and it makes it difficult to trace large pattern pieces. So the larger that you can get it, the better. You will also need a pencil and a ruler, and ideally also a curved ruler, something like this one, which is also known as a French curve, which will help you with the tracing process. So with that, let's get on to tracing. We are going to trace a pattern out of the back of Sewing the Curve. So to get the patterns, you go to the back to this box, and then each pattern there is text here which basically explains what color it's been printed in and which sheets you will find the pieces on. So I am going to trace the Montvale today, which is kind of the most tricky one, just because there's quite a few pieces, and also because the pattern pieces have been split into two. So I'm going to show you how you also put those together. So here it says Montvale dress and tunic printed in blue. So we know that the ink color is blue. There are also black and pink ink, but we only need to look for blue. And then it's on sheet 1, front and back, sheet 3, front, sheet 4, back, sheet 5, back, and sheet 6, front and back. The reason is because the pieces are so big, they're spread across a lot of pages. So I am only going to trace off 2 pieces, but I'll show you how it works. So I'm going to take the pieces out of the book. Okay, so I've got the sheets out. So I'm going to open the first one, and you may not always open it immediately at this size, but this one says sheet 6 front. So it actually says here that the Montvale dress, the 2B front with a drop sleeve is on here, and the back sleeveless is on this piece. So I think that I am going to trace the sleeveless version. So that means I do want to trace the back, and it's saying it's on this side. So on the sheet 6 front is the back. So I'm looking for piece number 3. It says 3 here, and I'm going to trace it. So I'm going to put the others aside for a minute. Okay, so we know that the Montvale is printed in blue. So here is where you kind of have to put your mental blue glasses on. If you actually had glasses that blocked out colors, that would actually be quite useful for now. So there is a blue piece here. There is a blue piece here. So there are 2 blue pieces on here. We're going to ignore, as if they didn't exist, the red and the black pieces. Now, if you're colorblind, or if this is just really tricky, then using the PDF patterns is much better because they are not overlapped and you don't have to worry about colors. But I am showing you today what you do if you are using the colored ones. So I'm looking for piece 3. So it's here. It says 3 back, and it's only half of the back. So we are actually going to be tracing the lower back and then putting the 2 pieces together. And you can tell that by the fact that there's these 2 rectangular notches here, and there is a line here, and it says tape back skirt here before cutting fabric. So the first thing I'm going to trace is this. So I'm just going to move it up a little bit so that it's more central on the screen. So it's this piece. Now, The next thing I'm going to do is identify the size line that I want. So there are different ways to do this, but there are tabs here explaining. So it says US 12, UK 16, and then each one goes out. And it's just inside the line. So you want to go out. So the line you want to copy is above the tab. In addition, the different lines have different line treatments. So some have dashes, some have dots, some have dot dash dot dash. It's like Morse code. So you can also use that if you get confused as you go around which one you're tracing. That's a great way to figure it out. So just for the sake of ease, I'm going to trace the size 12. So you want tracing paper. This is called Swedish tracing paper, and it is very handy for this type of thing. And I'm just going to roll the tracing paper over the pattern piece, and I'm going to secure it down in a few places so that it doesn't move around. The next thing I need, I'm just going to move this all up a little bit further so I'm right in the center there for you. So you can see that it's actually pretty easy to see the blue through. The next thing you're going to need is a pencil and also a straight ruler. And in an ideal world, you would also have a French curve, which is this type of ruler, but you don't need to have it. So I am going to do this using pen, not pencil, so that you can see what I'm doing. But I would not recommend doing it in pen for numerous reasons, not least that it may bleed through the paper at some point. So I'm going to start with the easiest bit, which is the straight line here. So I'm going to simply place my ruler along the straight line and draw it. Now I'm doing the size 12, so this is kind of easy for me because it's the smallest size. So I know it's the smallest size here. And I am going to draw a line down. Now there's another straight line here, so I'm going to do that line now. And you can see the paper curls up a little bit, so I'm going to make sure it's right in the right place. And now I'm going to do this side. Okay. So next I'm going to do this curved line. So it's kind of up to you. It also depends on like your hand drawing skills. But you can either freehand it or you can use a ruler like this, and you'll just have to keep on moving the ruler until you're getting the right curve. Now, as you go round, I recommend adding the notches. So there's a notch here. You can draw it as a V, as it is on the pattern, or you can just do this to indicate a notch, which is what I usually do. There are also these two markings here that are thicker, and these are to show you where you're going to connect the two pattern pieces later. And I'm also going to copy the arrow here to remind myself to tape it to the other piece there. So I'm just going to write tape to myself. Okay, so now I'm going to go around this curve. So this is a little bit trickier. Again, I'm going to use my French curve, and I'm going to just... You can keep on making short lines, or if you're confident, you can freehand it. Oops. Don't worry if you don't get it right first time, you can keep on refining. Okay, so then I'm going over this straight piece here, and then I'll show you what I mean by freehanding. So I'm going to do this one, just going to carefully draw around it there. Okay, so now I'm going to transfer the other markings because they're really important. So this piece is cut on the fold, so I'm going to copy the cut on fold, and I'm going to write fold for myself. Having a look to see if there's any other markings in blue, not really. However, what we do need to do now is we need to write down what is this pattern piece's name and the key information so we don't forget. So I'm just going to write it up here. So I'm going to write Montvale number 3, because it's piece number 3. It's back sleeveless. So back sleeveless. It's view A. And the seam allowance is 1/2 inch. Seam allowance 1/2 inch. Now, the other thing that I didn't do yet is the length and shorten lines here. So even if you don't intend to use them, I think it's a good idea to add them because you just never know down the line and it will be helpful for you then. So I'm just going to keep it as the double line because I know a double line means a lengthened and shortened line. Okay, so that piece is now traced. So the next thing I'm going to do is cut it out. So I'm using paper scissors and not fabric scissors for this. So I just tend to roughly cut it first. Okay. And now I can cut that piece out and the upper piece is finished. I just need to find the lower skirt and tape them together. Okay, so I now have my upper piece and now I'm going to find the lower piece. Now, if you were doing this for real, I would just go through one sheet after another, find the relevant piece, trace it, and then trace everything on that pattern and then go to the next one. But in this case, because I'm only going to be showing you one, I am going to look for the back. So now I've found the back skirt piece here. So I'm going to open up the paper. And just for the purpose of this demonstration, I am going to trace it at the tunic length, which is this length. So it says cut here for view B, but if you know you're just making a tunic, you don't actually have to cut it. You can just trace the length that you want. So I'm going to get myself a fresh piece of tissue paper. Bring this down here. Now this is ultimately the same process that you would use to trace any printed pattern. Patterns in books are more likely to have this like overlapping colors approach. So don't worry, this is not what most patterns are like. Cashmere patterns, apart from our book patterns, are not overlapped at all. So if you're looking at this going, oh, I never want to use a printed pattern, don't worry. Like most printed patterns are actually much easier. It's just because in books, they don't have much space to print them, so they overlap them more. There are also some pattern magazines that have the same kind of look to them. So usually you will just be copying it, but you're not having to worry about other pattern pieces. So this is the lower back. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to trace along the top edge first, the size 12. Then I'm going to go down the side. There we go. Okay. Now I'm going to do this side over here. So I'm going to freehand this first piece. And then I'm going to follow it down to here. Now we are facing another sort of more challenging thing when you use printed patterns, which is that sometimes there's lots of lines that are close up to each other. Now, if you use the PDF pattern, you can actually just turn on or turn off what layers you want. So instead of seeing this, you will only see one layer, one line, which is actually a lot easier, especially as a beginner. So another good reason to consider using the PDF patterns. In this case, it's actually not that hard for me because the size 12 is just the smallest size the whole way. But if you're using one in the middle, sometimes it's a good idea to kind of go along very carefully and make some dots first to make sure that you're following the correct line. In my case, it's pretty simple. Okay, so I've traced around it now. I'm going to add in the length and shorten lines. Then I'm going to add in the cut on the fold here. And then I'm going to add the registration marks here for when I'm going to connect things. So I'm going to write tape here. And then I'm going to do the same. I'm going to write Montvale. And this is B, which is back skirt. And this is all views. But I have cut the tunic length, so I'm going to write that down. And seam allowance is 1/2 inch. Okay, so now I'm going to cut this piece out. Okay, so now I've traced out the 2 pieces of the back on the Montvale. So the final thing to do is to connect them together. So I have the markings here that say tape, and I have the markings here that say tape. So I'm literally just going to bring them together, butt them together, and these markings should match up perfectly if I trace them well. And the edges should also match up perfectly. In all honesty, I am not the best tracer, guys. I'm going to admit that. You want to try and be as accurate as you can. I am not being perfectly accurate here, but you should be. And by doing that, you will therefore have everything lining up perfectly. So let me just go here. And then there's a little bit of a gap because I didn't do it perfectly. And then tape across here. A bit in the middle as well. So yeah, the hole here is where I cut imperfectly, but you're going to do it much better than me. So that's it. So you now have a traced pattern piece ready to make the Montvale tunic. So now you simply continue to do the same thing with all the other pattern pieces. If you'd like to see more videos to help you learn to sew, head over to cashmerette.com/learn to sew. And I highly recommend picking up a copy of my book, Sewing the Curve. I wrote this book so that curvy people like me could learn how to make a wardrobe of garments that make you feel so confident and also fit well. I cover everything from setting up your sewing machine to understanding sewing patterns and fabric, all the way to making your first garment. It comes with 6 full-size sewing patterns in sizes 12 to 32 and cup sizes C to H. So if you're thinking about sewing, you're excited about it, but you're uncertain where to begin, I really recommend picking up a copy of Sewing the Curve.